the Bible contains accurate data about where archaeologically we can find the ruins of ancient cities. Okay, that's not too extraordinary to me. I have no problem saying that the people who wrote these texts knew where these places were with exact precision. And in fact, notice what's happening. Notice what's happening, in my view. What's happening is that the Bible is a historical text and a scientific text when it needs to be, and it's not one when you don't want it to be. So when I said a moment ago, here's a relatively mundane historical fact about the Gospels, you said, well, the fact that some mundane historical fact should undermine Christianity is ludicrous. But now you're telling me that a mundane historical fact is enough to buttress Christianity. I don't think you can have your cake and eat it too in that case.
I'm not trying to have my cake and eat it too. I'm simply saying that if somebody gives a true account of events, complete with small details that are incidental to the narrative, the Bible refers to very minor figures at times. Let's take, for example, Caiaphas. Caiaphas is one of the two high priests who is present at Jesus' trial. We don't even know his first name. He's mentioned as Caiaphas. The historian Josephus calls him Josephus Caiaphas. And that is the only indication from Josephus, and only one source, and a source writing a little later, of what this guy's name even was. And until recently, a few decades ago, there was absolutely no corroboration that there was ever a guy even named Caiaphas. Except now, not only do we have inscriptions with his name, we actually have his bones.
But Dinesh, what does this matter?
Okay, so what I'm getting at is...
What does this matter at all to the question?
Why does it matter?
Why does this matter?
Because if somebody is giving a true account of events, a guy comes running into this room and he goes, guess what? I've just witnessed a murder. He's going to give us a lot of accounts and a lot of detail, right? Now,
look, if somebody was trying to claim that Moses parted the Red Sea, and I said, well, how could you possibly know that's the case? And you said, well, look, we didn't have any evidence that a guy called Moses existed, but we've discovered this rock where someone wrote Moses was here.
No.
Great,
no,
okay, we know Moses existed, and maybe we know where he existed, but the actual events, the stories that are attributed to these characters are in no way supported by anything that you're saying. And that's the important thing. I think that's what people are interested in. I doubt that anybody in this room, and they can make themselves known if they're here, I don't think anybody in this room either thinks that it's important or is troubled in their skepticism by the existence of these people and the real existence of the places that are described in the Old Testament.
Right, and neither do I think that a single Christian believer in the world would be shaken by anything that you've said today. So let's really try to meet in the middle on the stuff that really matters. And I think what we're really saying, when you mentioned the parting of the Red Sea, to me, it's like, now we're talking. Because we're talking about...
These are different. These are
categorically different types of events.
I mean what you just said, these are different, because people are troubled by what I say, and they're not troubled by what you say. Because for an atheist to say that Hezekiah existed doesn't mean they can't be an atheist. For a Christian to say that Jesus didn't historically rise from the dead means that they're not a Christian.
Correct.
So these are different. They're asymmetrical.
They're asymmetrical. So let's pick up the.
So it matters. It matters when the historical elements are wrong, in terms of our grand conclusion. For the Christian, it matters when the history gets it wrong. For the atheist, it doesn't matter when the history gets it right.
What I'm saying is that if someone gives a true account of events, it is normal for the accounts to vary, to differ, in some cases to have minor contradictions. Sure. The real question is did the thing that's being described actually happen?
Okay, so
let's turn to that.
Do you think, for example, that the slaughter of the Amalekites that I mentioned before actually happened?
Probably, of course.
And if that happened, I mean, we haven't spoken about the concept of moral truth. I'd like to get the time to do so.
We can come to that, but let's stay with what I think you were about to get to, which I think is the heart of the matter that we haven't even gotten to, and that's this. The Bible is where the Bible is the most unbelievable is in its account of astounding and miraculous events.
Sure.
Right? Healings. Let's take the most outrageous event of all, which is, let's just say, bringing a guy back from the dead.
Yeah.
Presented in the Bible as a miracle.
Talking about Lazarus here, rather than
I'm talking here about Lazarus. Yes, Lazarus. Perfect. Now, for a Christian would say this: the Bible doesn't try to prove it, it simply asserts it. In fact, it presents it as a truth of revelation, if you will. God revealed this. It's a miracle, which is to say that it is not something that happens within the seeming known laws of nature, which we'll talk about in a moment. And the question really here is, are these kinds of miracles possible? If you say, are they implausible, or are they rare, or is it difficult to believe, the Christian is like right with you.
I think the question is, did they happen?
Did they happen, right? And here's where the Christian and the atheist are on common ground, because the Christian and the atheist would both say that based upon ordinary experience, it can't happen.
Sure.
Because otherwise it wouldn't be a miracle.
So what evidence might we have to suggest that these miraculous events as described in the Gospels did happen?
I'm saying that because the miraculous events, the Christian would simply say, if God exists, miracles are obviously possible.
Sure, I agree.
The atheist has a higher burden. And that is, the atheist has to say that whether or not God exists, which is not the topic of our debate here, miracles are impossible. Because if they're possible...
They don't have to say that.
You don't have to say that?
No, of course they don't have to say that.
You don't have to say that. You say it is possible for a man to be raised from the dead.
I can say that that's possible without thereby...
But you're saying, but this particular one didn't happen, but the event is possible.
Without thereby in any way telling us anything about whether it happened as reported to
Is it possible is it possible for the Red Sea to be parted?
Sure, why not?
It is.
Okay.
Okay. Is it possible for a...
But what does that do for us? Is it possible that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse?
Okay, so here's our problem.
Well, hold on. Yes or no?
Yes, of course it's possible.
Of course it's possible. So that means that, the miraculous events as described in Islam, you've got such a higher burden of proof than the Muslim does if you're having a debate with a Muslim.
But
because you have to say that's impossible.
I am not trying to prove the veracity of this or that miracle. I freely admit that I can't do that.
I'm not trying to prove the veracity of this
but
or
you
that
can't
miracle.
disprove it either.
No, of course I can't disprove it.
Exactly.
But that's not my task yet. That's like me saying, I think that, I don't know, to take a Shakespearean example, I think that, spoiler alert,
But we don't need a Shakespearean example.
Romeo took the poison.
Let's take an actual...
And if you said, well, hold on, how do you know that actually happened? And I said, well, you can't prove that it didn't.
Well, let's pick an actual example that pertains to Christianity. Let's talk about something I raised earlier.
We've got about 5 minutes before Q&A,
okay.
by the way.
Do you believe that there is life after death?
I don't know.
You don't have no idea.
Yeah, I'm agnostic on that.
So if I say that there's life after death, am I being unreasonable?
I don't think so.
Not at all.
It depends on your reasons.
It depends on my reasons, but what I'm saying is, if I were to tell you that there is no empirical way to prove this one way or the other, my faith, let's say, that there's life after death is just as reasonable as someone who says there isn't.
Sure, it depends on what the reasons that are given are, of course, but sure. That's
We're talking about the reasons that are actually available. Not the person who's giving a reason may give the best or not the best reason.
It's pedantic, but I'm happy to say yes. I just want to be careful what I say, because people might get the wrong impression of my beliefs. But yeah, sure. I mean, sure. We've got two people. One says life after death. One says not. They're both just as reasonable as each other.
They're both just as reasonable.
Sure. That can be.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Good. I wanted to clarify that point particularly because
what's this got to do with the truth of the Bible?
Well, all I am saying is that the claims of miracles, you and I are not going to be in a position to go back and see whether or not Jesus raised a man from the dead,
well,
right?
It's not all you say. It's not all you're saying.
The Christian is perfectly willing to take that on faith.
You think that did happen, and you're taking it on faith, and that's fine.
Yes.
More power to you. And in fact, I envy your ability to believe things despite what
well,
seems
don't
to me
you
like
take a lot of things on faith?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Plenty of things on faith.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
So all the things that you take on faith
Yeah.
are things that you think are not unreasonable, but the things that Christians take on faith are to you unreasonable because they can't be corroborated with historical evidence.
Is that what I said? I don't remember saying that.
So are the Christian beliefs on faith just as reasonable as everything that you believe on faith?
It can be, depending on the reasons, but the veracity of the gospel accounts and the Old Testament prophecy, I think, is unreasonable to believe in. Not life after death, that's fine, you can believe that. Not like, a man called Jesus rose from the dead, fine. But the idea that the Bible comports with reality either in mythological sense, in an allegorical sense, in a moral sense, or in the sense of historicity.
Let's talk about the moral sense, since you raised it, and we'll just talk about it briefly.
I want to make sure we've got time for Q&A, but look, I can reread the text if you like. The Amalekites...
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites, in part because here's the problem. For most Christians, the Old Testament is different than the new and is seen through the light of the new. So
But
I'm
God-
not.
the
You,
God
if
is
you
the
want to,
same.
if you want to go to, Dennis Prager, who has written about this from a Jewish perspective, has written about the Deuteronomy, the Book of Kings, the Amalekites.
Sure, we can bring him out
what he
later,
considers
but-
to be the justifiable massacre of the Canaanites. I don't really want to go there because.
Well, I know why you don't want to go there.
Well,
because
the
it's
reason I don't want to go
unjustifiable.
there, the Old Testament is full of horrific massacres.
Yes, and
that is
massacres-
hold on.
Massacres which are ordained. by God.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
Sure.
Agreed. And
Well,
which
why are you
which
saying
are-
Yahweh instead of God? Why are you sort of subtly trying to distance yourself from the God of the Old Testament?
Well, I'm not trying to distance myself. I'm simply trying to say that any reader.
So why is that the first time you've used the word Yahweh in this conversation?
I'll tell you why. Because there is a movement within the Bible itself that you are completely missing.
Do not think that I have come
Hold
to
on, hold on,
abolish
hold
the
on.
law
Let me-
or the
let me-
prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount, referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and law.
Referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
Old
Look,
Testament law. And what I'm referring to here is an Old Testament law, which you're now trying to distance yourself
No,
from and say that it's sort of
I'm
different to the
saying-
New
I'm
Testament.
saying that you're
That's not
miss-
what Jesus thought.
I'm saying you're missing the developmental track of the Bible that is obvious to any intelligent reader. Let me give you one example of what I'm talking about.
Tell me about the Amalekites. Tell me what the developmental
It's not about the
trajectory
Amalekites.
of this
It's about the
genocide
way that
is.
the whole story of the Bible changes in tone and mood and message.
But
I mean,
Dinesh,
for example,
help me out here. Like, just tell me where, any way you like. Tell me where this fits into that trajectory.
Okay,
Tell
I'll
me
tell you
this
where.
fits in.
We have just a couple minutes, guys, so let's wrap it up before the Q&A.
Just tell me.
the
just tell me where
underlying
this
the
fits in.
underlying message of the Old Testament is an eye for an eye. The Amalekites are the enemies of the Israelites. The Israelites will crush them with the same venom that the Amalekites would have crushed the Israelites. That's called an eye for an eye.
Including
now,
the
hold
children,
hold on.
The children, the infants,
The children,
the
the
cattle,
infants,
the sheep, the camels, the donkeys.
Yeah, that Dennis Prager says yes, but my point is different. You will not find that spirit
not an
at
eye for an
all in the New Testament. In fact, in the New Testament, you've got a spirit of forgiveness. So what I'm getting at is to pretend
probably
like
do
you
with some
don't have
forgiveness
this.
after I mean,
Christianity is named after Christ. It's based on Christ as a fulfillment of the Old Testament. But what does fulfillment mean? It actually means transcendence. In Abraham's time, blood sacrifices are normal, right?
that can't
when
be right,
Christ
Dinesh.
comes as a sacrifice, Christ is the Lamb. The point is, those blood sacrifices
That can't be
aren't necessary
right.
anymore.
Listen,
That's
I'm-
the Christian reading. And you keep filibustering me because you know that the Bible is showing a movement in a direction, and to miss the movement is to miss the Bible. Let's look at God in the Bible.
Hold on,
Let me make one quick point about
well,
God in the Bible.
There's nothing quick about what you're doing, Dinesh. There's nothing quick about what you're doing. I need to be allowed to respond to what you're saying. I'm getting sick whenever
You're
I have these
cross-examining me
conversations.
on the justice of smiting the Amalekites. Honestly, I don't see any justice in it, but I do agree that was the eye for an eye ethic
Eye
of the
for an
Old
eye.
Testament that is repudiated and transformed and transfigured in the New.
I've had this conversation so many times, most recently with William Lane Craig. At least he had the gall to just tell me that, yes, that was a moral thing for God to do. I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide by some vague reference to the fact that Jesus came along to do something which somehow kind of undoes the immorality of it. Like, this is not an eye for an eye. This is a genocide of combatant men, innocent women, and children, and animals. Saul is punished by God for not killing all of the animals. Like
That is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening
let me just
with
make
Saul
Can
and
I,
David.
Let me just make a quick point.
let me
just
check
make a
in
quick
just-
point. I have to make this point.
Okay.
I've got to read the text from Joshua as well.
Okay, and then we'll check in with the audience because we're probably. I think the audience is going to agree that we want this to keep going.
No, that's fine. If
Instead
we
of
wanna
going
go
to
to Q&A,
Q&A,
that's
but we'll
fine.
check
That's
in
fine.
just after Alex's point here.
I think it's important, like, read these texts for yourself. There is no way that I'm misreading this text. We know that this is what's happening. In the slaughter of Ai, that's a type of Canaanite. In Joshua, we're told that when Israel had finished killing all of the men in Ai, in the fields and in the wilderness, where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. That is to say, that we're told that this is just because the promised land was inhabited, and God's God, he's allowed to do this. So because the Israelites want that land, they have to go and chase out the eye. So they chase them into the wilderness. They chase after them. They slaughter them in the wilderness. They then turn around, come back into the city, and kill who's left. Who's left if the combatants have run away? The women and the children. This is intolerable.